So we're going to be in 1 Kings 5, like I said, and we're at the start of what is going to be 173 verses on the building and furnishing and dedication of Solomon's temple. So the whole process of building and dedicating the temple, it's one of the larger single units of text in the entire Bible. And this morning we're going to cover the construction of the temple in chapters 5 and 6. Next week, we'll look at the furnishing of the temple in chapter 7. And then the week after that, we'll look at the dedication of the temple in chapter 8. So it's 3 weeks on the temple, although we're doing a lot of verses each Sunday morning. And before we get started, I want to make a few points on this overall section. First, there are several places in this text which demonstrate that this is a very ancient description of construction. This is a very ancient record. For instance, it's going to talk about events here taking place in the month of Ziv, which is said to be the second month. And the reason that the editor added in that Ziv is the second month is that Ziv is not a Hebrew term for the second month of the year. It is a Phoenician term, which is suggesting that this is an older document from back in the time period when the Israelites were still using the Phoenician terms to talk about the calendar months of the year. And then on top of that, a lot of the language that describes the layout of the temple, we do our best to translate it into English, but some of it really is without meaning to us. We're just making our best guesses as to what this terminology means when it comes to the construction and measurement. That type of language was just lost over time. And all of this points to the fact that this is just a really ancient description. The type of things that are described also falls in line from some other monuments that we found from close to the time period of Solomon, talking about the description of the building of other temples from that time period, really showing us this is very ancient and goes all the way back to the time period of Solomon. Somebody just didn't invent this during the Babylonian exile, but this is clearly an ancient document. The other thing I want to bring up at the beginning is that I think the key to this entire passage that we're going to look at, ultimately all 173 verses, I think the key passage is in chapter 6, verses 11 through 13, where the Lord tells what he requires from them. And that is he requires faithfulness from his people to continue to walk with them. And I want to bring this up at the very beginning to say that, and I'm going to mention this several times all throughout the next 3 weeks, but I don't believe God himself is impressed by what we read here in these chapters. I don't think God is ever impressed by the buildings that we build in this world. I think the closest equivalent you could say to the way that God might be impressed by the buildings that we would build in this world is the way that a parent might look at a clay sculpture that his child built, maybe formed it into a ball or just made it into a snake, and you're like, oh, that's delightful. And I think that that's how God looks at these grand structures that we make, like oh, that's adorable that you made that, but I made the Grand Canyon. I made the oceans. I made the entire world. Like that's cute that what you did, but that's not gonna sway me in anything. And so I think God makes it clear that these grand buildings in our eyes, I think they are fine gestures of worship. There's nothing wrong with the temple, but the key for God is always our faithfulness in walking with him. God would rather us be humble people who love him and love others and worship him in a house made out of straw than have the grandest building on earth, but then be proud in our approach to him and to others. And if we ignore God and walk away from him, if we worship the idols of this world, God is more than happy to decimate what we have built and start back over from scratch. So I want to make that clear at the beginning because I don't want us to ever be overawed at the building of man. And I want us to always be focused on our faithfulness to God. And I think that that's kind of woven in throughout these chapters. So let's start with Solomon making a deal to get some lumber in 1 Kings chapter 5, verses 1 through 7. Now Hiram, king of Tyre, sent his servants to Solomon because he heard that they had anointed him king in place of his father. And for Hiram had always loved David. Then Solomon sent to Hiram, saying, You know how my father David could not build a house for the name of the Lord his God because of the wars which were fought against him on every side, until the Lord put his foes under the soles of his feet. But now the Lord my God has given me rest on every side. There is neither adversary nor evil occurrence. And behold, I propose to build a house for the name of the Lord my God, as the Lord spoke to my father David, saying, Your son, whom I will set on your throne in your place, he shall build the house for my name. Now, therefore, command that they cut down cedar logs for me from Lebanon, and my servants will be with your servants, and I will pay you wages for your servants according to whatever you say. For you know that there is none among us who has skill to cut timber like the Sidonians. So it was, when Hiram heard the words of Solomon, that he rejoiced greatly and said, Blessed be the Lord this day, for he has given David a wise son over this great people. So this deal that struck between Solomon and Hiram for lumber, this deal is built upon the success of David in battle. So before the rise of King David, the greatest threat and adversary to Tyre in their shipping empire was the Philistines, who lived right on the coast. And so when David, in his reign, conquered the Philistines, David, not intending to do so, David made Tyre the shipping conquerors of the world. So it was because of what David did in his victories over Goliath and the Philistines over many battles that had made Tyre and Sidon able to dominate the Mediterranean Sea without a real force to oppose them in the shipping industry. So, of course, this made David and Hiram close allies. Like, it's no reason Hiram loved David because of what David had done for his shipping empire. And verse 4, I think, highlights the abundant rest that God had given to Solomon. Solomon not only had rest, but we read that no matter where Solomon looks, there's not even a threat to the rule that he has over the kingdom. And I think this might be the ultimate goal for the people of God, that we live in such a state of rest under a wise ruler that we look around and we're like, there isn't even opposition to the peace of God's people. I think that's ultimately what we're looking for in the reign of Jesus Christ. Now, I believe Solomon did have his heart in the right place when he constructed the temple. It was for the name of Yahweh, his God, and not for his own glory. And I hope that when we serve God, that will always be our focus. We don't want to serve God so that people think that, we look great in what we're doing and they thank us for all the things that we do in the church, but we always want to do it to bring glory to the Lord. Solomon, in his wisdom here, recognizes the skill and the wisdom of the lumberjacks of Sidonia. And if you remember, as we talked about this last week, one of the keys to wisdom is to know when to delegate to the right people who have the right skills. So this is another little sprinkle of Solomon's wisdom here in the midst of this text by having the Israelites work with, most likely under the Sidonians, in the cutting and transport of this lumber. And if you look at where the world powers were at this point in history, you have the Israelites, you have the Egyptians to their south, and you would have the Assyrians and the Babylonians off to the west. The interesting thing is about the geography of all of those other world powers. None of them had land that was suitable for growing quality timber. You couldn't find it in any of those areas. And the only place they knew of at that time period to get quality timber was from the area of Tyre and Sidon. And since they were basically the only people in the game to get good timber, that made, due to scarcity, their timber to be extremely valuable, which is why we get the emphasis of it here in 1 Kings chapter 5. So we see their agreement to bring the lumber down to Jerusalem now in verses 8 through 12. Then Hiram sent to Solomon, saying, I've considered the message which you sent me, and I will do all you desire concerning the cedar and cypress logs. My servants shall bring them down from Lebanon to the sea. I will float them in rafts by the sea to the place you indicate to me, and we'll have them broken apart from there. Then you can take them away. And you shall fulfill my desire by giving food for my household. Then Hiram gave Solomon cedar and cypress logs according to his desire, and Solomon gave Hiram 20,000 cores of wheat as food for his household, and 20 cores of pressed oil. Thus Solomon gave to Hiram year by year. So the Lord gave Solomon wisdom as he had promised, and there was peace between Hiram and Solomon, and the two of them made a treaty together. So we read here the description of the transportation of the logs from north of Israel down to the region of Judah to the south. The most noteworthy part of this section is reading the payment that Solomon gave for these logs. A payment of 20,000 cores of wheat and 20 cores of oil every year. This is a massive sum of food. Like, this is not only going to be responsible basically for feeding all of Hiram's capital city during the years of the construction, but probably feeding most of the entire nation during this time period. Like, that's how much food we're talking about here. That's how large a core was. And Solomon is giving that for anywhere from 7 to 13 years. The temple took 7 years to construct. His palace took 13 years. So probably for a period of about 13 years, Solomon was nearly feeding the entire nation, which illustrates the value of these cypress logs. At this time period, cypress was probably more valuable than gold. It was probably easier for them to come across and mine gold than it was for them to get these valuable cypress logs. So that's why we have this emphasis on the cypress logs in these 12 verses, just because they were extremely valuable at this point in time. And now we have a description of the labor that chopped the logs and brought them down to Judah in verses 13 to 18. Then King Solomon raised a labor force out of all Israel, and the labor force was 30,000 men. And he sent them to Lebanon, 10,000 a month in shifts. They were 1 month in Lebanon, 2 months at home. Adoniram was in charge of the labor force. Solomon had 70,000 who carried burdens and 80,000 who quarried stones in the mountains, beside 3,300 from the chefs of Solomon's deputies, of the chiefs of Solomon's deputies, who supervised the people who labored in the work. And the king commanded them to quarry large stones, costly stones, and huge stones to lay the foundation of the temple. So Solomon's builders, Hiram's builders, and the Gebalites quarried them, and they prepared timber and stones to build the temple. Probably the most notable part of the description of the laborers from our modern perspective is that it reads as a labor force in the New King James Version. I'm not a fan really of that. It's forced labor. Like, that's what the term meant. Like, Solomon didn't go to people and be like, hey, you want to work 1 out of 3 months cutting timber? No, he went to the people and it's like, okay, you are going to work 1 out of 3 months. This is a term that means forced labor. If it would be continuous labor, you would end up calling it slave labor. But since they worked 1 month, they were off 2 months, you wouldn't call them slaves. But for 1 out of every 3 months during the building of the temple and the palace, Solomon required the Israelites to work 1 out of 3 months in the building of these structures. No wonder when Rehoboam became king, the people were like, man, your dad has had heavy labor on us. Please relieve us a little bit. And he should have. But I think the key thing here is to see that Solomon's forcing the people into this, and also to note that the resources of stones and costly stones, they were quarried from inside of Israel, so they didn't need to go to nations outside to get that, but they were able to get that from their home location. And so these are the resources that were brought out for the temple. We read about the lumber that they get, the stones, the costly stone material, and now we get the outline of the temple building in 1 Kings chapter 6, verses 1 through 10. Now it came to pass in the 480th year, after the children of Israel had come out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, which is the 2nd month, that he began to build the house of the Lord. Now the house which King Solomon built for the Lord, its length was 60 cubits, its width 20, and its height 30 cubits. The vestibule in front of the sanctuary of the house was 20 cubits long across the width of the house, and the width of the vestibule extended 10 cubits from the front of the house. And he made for the house windows with beveled frames. Against the wall of the temple, he built chambers all around, and against the walls of the temple, all around the sanctuary and the inner sanctuary. Thus he made side chambers all around it. The lowest chamber was 5 cubits wide, the middle was 6 cubits wide, and the third was 7 cubits wide. For he made narrow ledges around the outside of the temple, so that the support beams would not be fastened into the walls of the temple. And the temple, when it was being built, was built with stones finished at the quarry, so that no hammer or chisel or any iron tool was heard in the temple while it was being built. The doorway for the middle story was on the right side of the temple. They went up by stairs to the middle story, and from the middle story to the third. So he built the temple and finished it. And he paneled the temple with beams and boards of cedar. And he built side chambers against the entire temple, each 5 cubits high. They were attached to the temple with cedar beams. So when we think of Solomon's temple, we typically think of an image like the one that you've seen up on the screen. I'm sure you've seen many images like the one above describing what Solomon's temple looked like. And while we know a lot of the details of Solomon's temple, if you read from commentary after commentary of scholars who've tried to really dig into the Hebrew on the text, they all end up expressing their extreme frustration. Like there are these terms that we're translating into English that we're not really sure what they mean, like all the stuff about windows and frames around them. Those are basically just guesses, and we're hoping that that's what it's talking about. Not really sure based on the terminology that is used there. And then on top of that, there's a lot of key details when it comes to knowing about the temple and what it looks like that are just, they're missing and they're not there. And so the most likely theory, because this is sort of common in the descriptions of major buildings from this time period in different parts of the world, the theory is that today, if we were to have a building that was built and we were to make our architectural designs from it, we'd have a specific architect who's writing those designs, who knows all about those terminology, and can write in detail and wisdom about everything with construction. Well, architects did not exist at that time period. The guy who was making the plans for how to do all this stuff probably never even wrote that stuff down because writing was such a specialized skill. And so most likely, the guy who is writing down this record in Kings and the guys who did the same thing in all the other nations when they wrote these down is one guy who walked around and he's like, oh, hey, well, I heard that that's that tall, and I think that that's that tall, and oh, look at those windows there. Let me write down about those, and look at this door there. Let me write about those doors and those steps there. And you would imagine that if somebody's just walking around writing down random details about stuff that stood out to him, like you'd be like, yeah, those are nice details, but I can't reconstruct the building off this random guy writing down about it. And that's kind of what we get in these biblical descriptions. So we need to understand that when we're reading this in English, some of the terms that they're translating, we're like, maybe this is what it is, we're not sure, and we can't really get a complete structure. So while that looks nice, we're guessing at a lot of stuff that's there on the screen. To me, the most noteworthy part of sort of the framing description of the temple is the dating that we see in this passage. We read that the temple was built in the year 967 BC, and based on that date, that would mean that the Exodus, when the Israelites came out of Egypt, took place in the year 1447 BC. Now, conservative scholars just accept that date as the consensus. I accept it. I see no reason to disagree with it. But if you ever see any writings or any material that talk about the dating of the Exodus, and they use this date of 1447, or some will use 1446, it's based off of this passage in 1 Kings. That's how we know the dating of when the Israelites came out of Egypt. So from a biblical chronological perspective, that verse in 1 Kings chapter 1, 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 1, is really one of the most important verses in the entire Bible because it sets for us really when all this stuff happens. It lets us know that even if you took the judges one by one all through the period of Judges, like the book of Judges would take like 400 years. But because of this dating in 1 Kings 6, we know that Judges can only take place over like, if I remember right, it's like 180 years. So we know that a lot of those judges would end up being overlapped. So while one judge was judging in one part of Israel, you'd have another judge judging over different tribes in another part of Israel. So this is all sort of smushed together in the time period of the judges. So yeah, like I said, how we build a lot of our biblical chronology is based on 1 Kings 6:1. So it's a really important verse. And then that brings us to our key theological passage in the construction of the temple, verses 11 through 13. Then the word of the Lord came to Solomon, saying, concerning this temple which you are building, if you walk in my statutes, execute my judgments, keep all my commandments, and walk in them, then I will perform my word with you, which I spoke to your father David, and I will dwell among the children of Israel and not forsake my people Israel. What's, I think, really interesting about these verses is just how much they stand out. They're right in the middle of this long section on measurements and heights and floors and how we're designing the temple and all of that. And it reads as if Solomon is engrossed in the midst of all of these details regarding the temple, all of these nuts and bolts, making sure that it's built right. And God comes to Solomon right in the midst of all of this and says, don't forget the most important thing, Solomon. As you're building this grand temple with giant cherub sculptures, will building this temple make you secure before God? No. Will building this temple secure God's blessing for the people of Israel? No. Solomon, if you want God's blessings, how are you going to get God's blessings? Well, you're going to need to walk according to God's statutes. You're going to need to execute his judgments. You're going to need to keep his commands. You're going to need to walk in them. And you're going to need to perform his word. And this is a strong reminder that building the temple did not get Solomon and Israel out of the requirements of the Mosaic covenant. It wasn't like this is a get out of jail free card. I can live however I want to because I built the temple. This is God saying, you're still under that same covenant. God is not blessing you based on the building that you have built. And we got to remember that in this world as well. God's not blessing anyone based on their facilities, based on the size of their structure, based on the number of people that come and worship together. We need to remember that the key to walking with God on a daily basis is to follow his words, to walk in truth, to live according to what he has spoken to us. And I love these verses from a dispensational perspective, recognizing that we're not under the Mosaic law in the way that God words this, because this is saying to me, like, there are words that God wrote to us. Like Jesus has commandments for his disciples. And if I want to walk in faithfulness with Jesus, I got to walk in line with this. And what's going to happen if I walk against the commands that Jesus has given for his church? Well, he's going to come down upon us with judgment and with discipline. He's not going to simply, pass us off because we have a wonderful building or because we have a long heritage. Like I was thinking while I was writing this, how fascinating it is that out of all the churches that we have listed in the New Testament, we have the letter to the Church of Corinth, we have the letter to the Church of Ephesus, Galatia, Ephesus, Thessalonica. We have all of those listed there. Are any of those churches still existing today? No. No, they all ended up dying the life of churches. That happens, in these cycles that we have. What's the one church that still exists today out of all those churches that had letters written to them? The Church of Rome, which is corrupt beyond measure. So maybe it's not a good thing that we continue to endure all the time, and that it is that God brings judgment upon us when we don't walk according to faithfulness. So this is just a reminder that we can't ever get to the point in life where we feel like we have this lucky charm. Like for Israel, obviously it became the temple. There's clear passages later on where Jeremiah is like, don't say I have the temple of the Lord. Like God will still destroy you. And I think it's easy for us to be like, oh, because I've given this money to the church or because I've been faithful in this way. Like I have this certain thing. And I know because of that, God will always, give me what I want or overlook this sin. That's not how God works. Like God wants us to walk in humility before him and to follow his word, or he will bring judgment upon us for our sins. And I think that's what God's really trying to drive home to Solomon. And now we have the decorating of the temple. And I get to read a really long passage in verses 14 to 38. So Solomon built the temple and finished it. And he built the inside walls of the temple with cedar boards. From the floor of the temple to the ceiling, he paneled the inside with wood. And he covered the floor of the temple with planks of cypress. Then he built the 20-cubit room at the rear of the temple from floor to ceiling with cedar boards. He built it inside as the inner sanctuary, as the most holy place. And in front of it, the temple sanctuary was 40 cubits long. The inside of the temple was cedar, carved with ornamental buds and open flowers. All was cedar, there was no stone to be seen. And he prepared the inner sanctuary inside the temple to set the ark of the covenant of the Lord there. The inner sanctuary was 20 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, and 20 cubits high. And he overlaid it with pure gold and overlaid the altar of cedar. So Solomon overlaid the inside of the temple with pure gold. He stretched gold chains across the front of the inner sanctuary and overlaid it with gold. The whole temple he overlaid with gold. Until he had finished all the temple, also he overlaid with gold the entire altar that was by the inner sanctuary. Now that I'm reading this out loud, I feel like all I'm doing is saying overlaid with gold. Inside the inner sanctuary, he made 2 cherubim of olive wood, each 10 cubits high. One wing of the cherub was 5 cubits, and the other wing of the cherub was 5 cubits. 10 cubits from the tip of one wing to the tip of the other, and the other cherub was 10 cubits. Both cherubim were of the same size and shape. The height of one cherub was 10 cubits, and so was the other cherub. Then he set the cherubim inside the inner room, and they stretched out their wings of the cherubim so that the wing of the one touched one wall, and the wing of the other cherub touched the other wall. And their wings touched each other in the middle of the room. So he overlaid the cherubim with gold. Then he covered all the walls of the temple all around, both the inner and outer sanctuaries, with carved figures of cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers. And the floor of the temple he overlaid with gold, both the inner and outer sanctuaries. For the entrance of the inner sanctuary he made doors of olive wood. The lintel and doorposts were 1/5 of the wall. The 2 doors were of olive wood, and he carved on them figures of cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers, and overlaid them with gold. And he spread gold on the cherubim and on the palm trees. So the door of the sanctuary he also made doorposts of olive wood, 1/4 of the wall. And the 2 doors were of cypress wood. 2 panels comprised one folding door, and 2 panels comprised the other folding doors. Then he carved cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers on them, and overlaid them with gold, and applied evenly on the carved work. And he built the inner court and the 3 rows of hewn stone and a row of cedar beams. In the 4th year, the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid in the month of Ziv. And in the 11th year, in the month of Bul, which is the 8th month, the house was finished in all its details according to its plan. So he was 7 years in building it. All right, so that long description about the decorations and the gold plating of the temple. The interesting thing is that when it comes to the decorating of the temple and talking about the inner furnishings, the vast majority was focused on the most holy place. That is the place where the Ark of the Covenant will set underneath the shadow of those giant wings of the cherubim statues that are built over it. It's interesting that at this point, there's no mention of the table of showbread or the altar of incense. They'll come up later at the end of chapter 7. But at this point, the focus is all on the inner sanctuary. And I believe that the focus is on the inner sanctuary at this point because this is all about talking regarding how God is going to dwell with man. That's the focus of it. The most holy place is about God's fellowship with his people and where he comes down to the mercy seat to make atonement on behalf of the people. And what I think is interesting is how this area is decorated. Because if we think about it, where do we think we will be the first time we view God face to face? We think about seeing God, seeing Christ in heaven for the first time, seeing him face to face in glory. But I believe the building of Solomon's temple was designed in such a way and decorated in such a way to emphasize Not us going to dwell with God in heaven, but God coming to earth to dwell with man on earth. And I think specifically the description of the cherubim, the palm trees, and the open flower, in my opinion, I believe that that is pointing toward the Garden of Eden. And the dream of the most holy place, the dream of Solomon's temple, is that we want to prepare Israel, and then we ultimately want to prepare the world for God to come down to the world and restore Eden over the entire world. I believe that Solomon's temple is an anticipation of the millennial reign of Jesus Christ on earth. When Jesus comes to the earth, reigns over the world, and restores it to the state of Eden. So why talk about cherubim covering the ark? Who was it who barred the entrance of Eden to Adam and Eve when they were taken out of it? It was cherubim who guarded the entrance to Eden. You talk about the palm trees and the flowers, because the dream is to go back to that beautiful garden that was there in Eden, to remember that time when Adam and Eve would walk with God in the cool of the day. And it's like we want that time when God will walk with us once again. And so you anticipate that through the construction of the most holy place, which then also illustrates for Israel what by and large are they lacking? The ability to walk with God in the cool of the day. Because can the average Israelite just stroll into the temple grounds? No, you can't. One of the major highlights of the whole system of sacrifice in Israel, which is highlighted on the Day of Atonement, is you're separated from the Day of Atonement. Because you can't see what's going on in the most holy place when that offering's being made. It's just the one high priest who goes in there one day a year. So you have all of this beautiful decoration, all of this gold, the palm trees, the flowers, the cherubim, and the people can't even see it because they're separated from God and they need atonement. What do they need? They need the Son of God to come and bridge that gulf, that gap of separation between us and God. So the very construction of the temple makes us long for the work of Jesus Christ, but then the way that it's designed with the angels and the palm trees and the flowers and the plants and all of that should make us looking back at the work of Jesus, make us looking back at the temple be like, oh, I cannot wait for the day when Jesus will come to earth and he will turn the entire world into a most holy place where man can dwell with the Son of God. So a great anticipation for us in what's built in the temple, for us longing for God to come to earth that we might be with him.